Welcome everyone to Universal Design for Learning. This is a part of our authentic assessment series, and there have been some wonderful workshops, and they'll all be recorded, or they've all been recorded, and they will either be put on the Reedley College intranet, or Fresno City College has a YouTube page, and we're also going to be putting on the Reedley College YouTube page. So there are multiple places to find workshops. If there was one that you missed and wanted to attend, just give us a little bit of time. They'll probably all be put up by next week. I'm going to hand this over to Amanda Tinctor. She is our instructional designer, child development teacher, student learning outcomes person, and just like kind of knows everything, I feel like. So take it away.
Thank you. That's a lot to live up to right now. And especially for a presentation like this, I was lamenting to Lori that it's very difficult to try and present UDL in 50 or so minutes. It is such a robust topic and there's so many nuances. I always have to have a disclaimer when I'm talking about it, just in case there's somebody in the audience who is an expert, that I'm not going to do this concept justice. People literally get master's degrees in this. So there's so much more richness. This is just barely scratching the surface. And I'm going to approach it in a much more practical lens. So it can get very technical once you study UDL and really get into the nuances and the nitty-gritty of it. I'm just going to do a very high level overview and really a practical approach. And that's where I think for many of us in applying these concepts into our classroom, what's going to be the most beneficial is thinking, okay, here's the basics, why this works and how we can make it happen in our classrooms. But I'm going to share some websites where you can get some more information if this is something that you want to look at the science and the citations and the research behind what they're saying. It's there. Absolutely go and look at it. All right. So how I first got into looking at UDL is I hated this concept of a bell curve. I remember when I first started teaching, it was so difficult for me to figure out who do I teach to. I have in my classroom this wide range of potential learners. For me, I teach ECE, so I have some students who their hearts is just they want to become an aide in the classroom. They're not looking to go to a transfer university. They don't need to know APA citation. They don't need to know all of these fancy, crazy academic things. They have a heart to work with children. They need to get these units. And then there's some that have very much a desire that this is a stepping stone. I'm going to go on and get a master's and doctorate degree. And then everything in between as far as what their academic desires were. And so it was this constant struggle of when I'm designing my assessments, when I'm delivering my content, who am I teaching to? Because I'd always thought there's this bell curve. So I thought, okay, the fair thing to do is just split the middle and I'll teach right to that right into the middle, to the average student. I read a fantastic book called The End of Average by Todd Rose. And if you haven't read it, one that I will always highly recommend. Basically, the premise of the book is there is no average. And if we design our class to meet the average student, we're designing our class not to support anybody's needs. And he's got some really great analogies in there that I won't go into, but it was really a pivotal moment in my teaching because I really felt this release to be able to teach to every student. Then it came, okay, how in the world do I do that then? How do I support as many different learners in my classroom in a way that was feasible and not completely overwhelming as an educator? So then I became interested in UDL. And I've heard many of these concepts because I have a master's in education. So it wasn't a totally foreign concept to me, the premise of UDL, but its application to me as a college instructor was new. And maybe many others made the connection before I did, but these concepts were something that I could totally get behind in how I implemented them in my college classroom. So the shift into UDL is it embraces that flexibility that I can, as an educator, actually support all of the ways that my students learn and with really just minor shifts in how I present my assessments, how I present my material. I forgot to say at the beginning, even though it doesn't sound like it because I present like a steam engine, please interrupt me if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns. The wonderful Lori is monitoring the chat for me, and will interrupt me very happily if I have anything in the chat. So at the core of the UDL principles is this concept of moving learners from novice learners to expert learners. And this is just one of the quotes on the CAST website. Education should help turn novice learners into expert learners, individuals who want to learn, who know how to learn strategically, and who, in their own highly individual and flexible ways, are well prepared for a lifetime of learning. And again, that just sat so well at my core because as an educator, no matter what discipline I'm teaching, that's one of the roles I found very important to me is, yes, I want them to get my content, but I also want to provide that scaffolding to help them become a novice learner, somebody who is learning how to learn, to an expert learner, someone who can be a consumer of their own knowledge and can go actively seek it and learn how to apply that in their own lives. So that is one of the things, one of the many things I really enjoy as I dive more into UDL is this concept of helping your learners become expert learners and not just novice learners. A big concept and a big thing to remember when we're looking at designing UDL is to think of it as we are choosing the learning destination and we're allowing students those different paths and how to reach it. And I read an analogy, I can't remember now where, so I can't give proper attribution, that explained it like a GPS. When I plug in a destination in a GPS, you have different routes that you get to choose. And depending on what those circumstances are in your life right then, you might choose different routes. If I'm financially crunched, I'm going to choose a route that doesn't have any toll roads. If I have all the hours in the world to get to my destination and I know it's particularly possibly scenic, I'm going to say avoid highways. I want to go the pretty route. If I need to get there right away, get me the shortest and the fastest, that the route I'm going to take. None of those other alternative routes are wrong. They're different options I'm taking based on the life circumstances that are afflicting me right now, or I have the opportunities to get to that destination. And this is the same analogy that we can take it to our students. Students are on different paths. They all want to get to that same, basically the same destination. And we're going to use the destination as our student learning outcomes. But we have the options as the instructors of the class, the teachers of record, however you want to say it, to give them different options in how they get to it. Some students, they just need to get the content. They need to show you how they know the content and get to the end. They need to get through quickly. They've got either financial barriers that make it so I just need to get done and get through my education and be able to get a job. And we want to allow them to do it. Some, they're taking this as a opportunity to build community with other learners. They want to engage in dialogue. They want to engage in communication. That's really what helps to feed them and their passion. So we want to give those students the option as well. And then we have students all in the middle of how they want to consume the content, how they want to express the content. So it feels overwhelming to think, oh, now you've created so many more options for me, Amanda. I feel so much worse. But we're going to look at, okay, what does that practically mean in our classroom? Does that analogy make sense? Does it start to form? Okay, I can see how this is gonna totally stress me out. Is it good? All right.
I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at unpacking some of these UDL concepts and let's get down to the vocabulary at first. So we've got this universal design for learning. Universal, hopefully that word is pretty universally known, but it means everyone. Everybody can access it. It doesn't matter what their abilities are, what their physical, what their mental abilities are. They have the option to be able to access that information. It is universally available. Design is the emphasis on we have the responsibility to design the curriculum, design the assessments, design the learning in a way that makes it universally acceptable to everybody. It's about creating that learning environment that works for everybody. It's an intentional choice to design it that way. And then learning is recognizing that this is the key piece that we want students to walk away with. We need to figure out, how do I design something that's universal so that everybody can walk away with learning, coming from that novice learner to that expert learner. And UDL breaks these down into 3 different networks. And we're not going to do a deep, deep dive in them, but I want to do a broad overview of what they mean, just so you can say, I know a little bit about UDL. So the what is the recognition network, the how is the strategic network, and the why is the effective networks. Again, don't need to memorize those. I have to look at my notes every time when I'm presenting because I can never remember what the different networks are. That's not the major point. The major point is that they've researched this and they've mapped it to these different networks of learning. So what are the basic principles and framework? And this hopefully has become inherent in what I have already said during the presentation. So it's a flexible framework that's really at its core is creating this flexibility in how you design your curriculum and how you design your assessments that provide flexibility for students and how they consume their knowledge and how they express their knowledge. There's those 3 guiding principles, or those 3 networks, that is represented by engagement, representation, and action and expression. And those are the 3 things that 3 pieces that we're going to spend our most time in. And what does that mean practically for how we design our courses and how we design our assessment? And then UDL is designed to be inclusive learning environments. And that was really pervasive in what I said in the other slide. And we're going to talk about how UDL is different than accessibility, but UDL is a way we can get to accessibility, because sometimes we'll think those terms are synonymous and they aren't. We still have some extra work to make sure that all of our content is accessible, but UDL is a way to help us get to universal accessibility for all students. So here is a really fantastic graphic that CAST created. I'm not going to spend any more time on this, the nuances, than just to show this in itty bitty writing that you can't read anyway, just to see this is how CAST has organized this. And cast.org is the website, super easy. They have all these free downloadables, so you can download this, you can blow it up, you can put it in your office, lots of different versions. You can have it with a citation, blah, 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 but it's just cast.org. Super easy. So the UDL guidelines, they're just a practical framework for how to implement UDL that are organized into these 3 different categories. So it's going to go into more detail than the practical approaches that I'm talking about today. So what I've talked about really entices you and you think, okay, yes, this is something that I want to know more about, please go take a look at their charts. They've got an abundance of resources to help you explore this further. Like I said, each category has very specific guidelines that educators can use to further their implementation of UDL principles. All right, so remember we talked about those different types of networks of learning. So let's look and see how those align. So we've got the why of learning, and that's that engagement. And so in that engagement, when we're talking about that as it applies to our teaching, is we're optimizing as much the choice and autonomy of students, both of how they consume the knowledge and how they express their knowledge. And we're going to optimize the relevance to the student. So why is it important to them? The value that it is to them. Why should they know this? Why is it important? Why should they feel that they should engage with the content, and the authenticity? So why is this important to you? Why is this something that you should need to know? And it is important for us to help make those connections, because that is going to increase the engagement. And we'll talk about this later, but engagement doesn't just mean more hands-on activities. A lot of times we think that in our mind and we think, I don't want to do another hands-on activity. That's not what I'm talking about. This is the engagement, making it relevant and valuable to our students. And then there's the what of learning and the representation. So that's where we're helping to support opportunities to customize the display of information. We'll dig into this a lot more detailed in just a second, but we're allowing students to represent their knowledge in a way that matches their abilities, the best way possible for them to represent what they know. It's also that we represent the knowledge we're trying to give them in multiple ways. So we support multiple ways for students to be able to perceive the information, to take the information in. And then we represent a diversity of perspectives and identities in authentic ways. So we don't want to just present, we don't want to say, all right, I presented the same perspective in a variety of way. Part of that multiple representation is representing diverse viewpoints or perspectives of that issue, whatever is that we're presenting. And this is something that has been thankfully much more greatly embraced in the last decade or so than it was in the past. And then the how of learning, so the action and expression. So this is honoring the methods and the response, how they navigate through our content. So making sure that's clear, making sure that they have different options to navigate through, that the pathway is clear to them. And then we're optimizing access to the accessible materials and that it is allowable to be used within different accessible technologies and tools. So we're getting more into that true accessibility as far as students with different capabilities. Okay. One of the many things, again, that I really appreciate about UDL's approach is that it acknowledges that there is emotions in learning. Now, I come from ECE, so this is highly embedded in what I do, and so it was a shock to me where other disciplines didn't. Understand is not the right word, but didn't make those connections as much when what we learn is highly entwined with our emotions. It can either hinder how we're learning something and how we're perceiving something, or it can enhance our application and how we take that knowledge in. So UDL principles are understanding that emotion plays a very high variable in how we're bringing in that emotion. You ask any math instructor and they're going to tell you a student that comes in saying, I hate math is going to have so much more difficult of a time, or I'm so bad at math. That's an emotion. So it makes it much more difficult for them to understand the math when in their head it's I'm bad at math. If you have a blank slate student coming in says, I'm great at math. Even if they aren't, that perception is going to make them so much more receptive to those new concepts. And that's how it is for anything in our classroom. We have to acknowledge the emotions that are surrounding that content is going to make it easier or harder. It's one of the reasons that we now highly advocate if it's sensitive content, we put trigger warnings. We say what you're about to read might be difficult. In some of the content that I cover, I talk about abuse. And so I've been very intentional to make sure I tell students this is a trigger warning concept. This is going to be hard for some of you, whether it's you have been a victim of abuse or you've seen it happening, or it's just a highly emotional topic for you. You need to get yourself ready before you read to that. And that's acknowledging that those emotions affect how that information is going to be perceived. And then on the flip side, if they're excited about it, if it's something that this is really neat, this is really fun, I'm super excited to learn, that's going to make it more likely that information will be inputted better and retrieval will be easier. All right, so flexible methods of content delivery. We've talked a lot about most of these, so it's just reiterating those points. We want to make sure incorporate those accessible elements. Flexible pacing is something that for some courses might be a little bit more difficult to implement, but it's something I really want you to think about. And it's much easier to think about this when you're teaching, say, a fully online class, because there's ways to just create that flexibility in a course. When you're doing a face-to-face course, that might be a little bit more difficult to think about accommodating. But how can we allow that flexible pacing? One way might be as simple as being more flexible on your due dates, allowing students to turn things in later if they're trying to catch up on the concept. If it takes them a little bit longer, to get to the point where they're understanding the concept and they need to take 2 weeks to consume that information, to read the content, and then they can submit the assessment, then that would create that flexible pacing. Now, we do have a finite amount of time, so of course it has to be there's only so much flexibility and pacing I have because the end of the semester is the end of the semester. But if you're able to allow students more time to consume the content at their own pace, and maybe that means, okay, it's a fully face-to-face class, but I'm putting all the content online as well so that they can take their time to return to the information and move more slowly through it if they need to. Moving more quickly is sometimes more difficult in a face-to-face class, but think through, is there a way that students might be able to accelerate through this content if they have the capacity to do so? All right, so what are some of the principles of representation? This is just at its core, finding various formats and various ways to represent the information. This can be text, this can be audio, this can be video, this can be visual aids. It's not saying that students have the different learning styles because we've all debunked that research, but it's different ways that they want to consume that specific content. We know that people aren't visual learners or auditory learners, but what we do know and what's verified is concepts can be easier for students to input in different formats depending on what the concept is. So I might take in this piece of information better if I'm listening to it, but this other piece of information I'm going to take in better as a graph or reading it. And so that's why it's important to not just have this one representation, but each concept as you're able to provide another method for them to consume the information. This is also why I'm such a huge advocate for utilizing Canvas and a huge advocate for open educational resources because it gives you that opportunity to put all the content in a Canvas page or whatever online resource you're using that represents it in multiple ways right there. If we have a static publisher textbook and then we have a YouTube video and then we have an interactive simuli, we're going to say, okay, go read chapter 5, and then our Canvas page has a video that is on one page in chapter 5 and they're having to go back and forth. So I'll show you an example of how I set this up in my class. I think I do. But that's one of the reasons I'm a huge advocate for those two concepts of setting up everything within Canvas because you have that option to represent it. All right. So let's look at principles of representation on how if I'm representing, this comes from a biology friend of mine. So would be in writing. I have no idea what this says because I'm not a biology major, but she assures me this is actually a thing, legit. So she says in her content, this would be one way she represent the concepts, and it's, some very fancy option. But she's also going to represent that same concept in a different way. So you have a one type of visual right here. And I think there was some extra text that didn't move over. If anybody's a biology person and going, wait a second, that's missing something. So here's another thing that represents what this is saying in the same way. And then you could have a video. So we have a third option. They're all saying the same thing, but you're giving students another way to consume that information. And then another type of visual, because it might be that I read it, I kind of get it, I get the vocabulary there. You have another way to consume it, and then I'm gonna watch a video, but oh, this visual makes it sense to me. So the more times, more ways you can represent that knowledge, especially if it's a complicated topic, then it's going to allow students to really embrace and engage at a much greater depth. So that's what we mean when we say multiple ways of representing the knowledge, multiple means of representation. And this is how I do it, what I was talking about representing in a Canvas page. And let me just blow that up a little bit.
I was just going to ask you to do that.
Let's see. So this is just one Canvas page and I blew it up and I have a lot of fun doing coding. So please don't think that the aesthetic part of it is what I'm representing. But what I want you to notice is that the text is broken up into a ways where it's not just, hey, read this section or read this chapter. Really love embracing Canvas to be able to break up that content. And again, I am one of the big reasons that I'm an advocate for using open educational resources because I have the legal right to be able to do this. The author has said, yeah, do whatever you need with this content. So you can see we've got text right here. It's broken up in a ways where it's not big chunks of text. We've got visuals that are supporting it. We've got videos that are supporting it. We've got images that are supporting it, and then other visuals. So you can have all these different ways to be able to support and represent that content without increasing the cognitive load by saying, read this, oh, now, and then 2 days later, I'm going to have a video in the Canvas module, and then 3 days later, we're going to talk about it in class. Because you can also embed those lectures right in there. So you've got multiple means of representation all in one distinct place. All right, so that's multiple means of representation. I'm representing the knowledge I want students to gain in multiple ways. By the way, YouTube is a fantastic place to be able to go and find different snippets. If you're at Reedley College, you can use Panopto to create videos really quick. Got a presentation at 2 o'clock talking about how to use that. Or Clovis or Madera, if you're at City, Canvas Studio makes it easy, but sit there and just create a quick video. Even if it's just 30 seconds of explaining a concept, Canvas makes it super easy to just do that really quick. You don't have to have this beautiful background. I don't know how many videos I've done where it's been no makeup, and I said, you know what? It doesn't matter. If I wait to get makeup on my face, this video is never going to happen. So it is what it is. But I pop in, do a quick explanation, 30-second of a video, and I'm creating another means of representation for that information. All right, so let's look at multiple means of expression. Traditional assessments rely on those traditional forms, written exams, essays, standardized tests. This entire week of presentations has all been about finding different ways to allow students to express their knowledge, creating more authentic assessments, finding different ways to that representation and student expression to happen. The traditional ways most often do not accurately reflect how students can best express their learning. If you're a person that does well on essays and you hit the mark every time, then you probably excelled at that type of knowledge representation. But if you didn't, then it probably was frustrating to you when you knew the content, but having to go and write a 5-page essay or even complete a multiple choice exam and you weren't able to just get that information out there, it's a super frustrating experience. So looking at applying UDL means we take a look at what it is that I'm hoping students will express to me and find different ways, allowing different ways for them to express that information. Sometimes that might mean multimedia projects, presentations, portfolios, performance-based tasks. We're going to take a look at some examples in just a second. So multiple means of expressions. Again, it's letting learners express their ways in different ways. It could even be some physical type of interaction. So a voice recording. I love all the different tools that are out there for free now that allow students to create a voice recording. One of the things that we talked about earlier in an earlier session was ask ChatGPT or whatever LLM that you use, hey, find some free video or voice recording software that I can point students to and give me the link. You don't need to be the expert in investigating those. You want to make sure and look at what the data privacy is so students are fully aware. If it's a free, they're usually selling something. And then use creative and adaptive tools. So things like graphic organizers, mind maps, digital tools. These are things that don't always work for all students, but allow different options, even if it's not something that you fully understand. Something like mind maps that might be, oh my goodness, I don't even know what that concept is, listed as an option. A student might want to go in and explore and say, this is exactly what I need. We'll talk about separating the means from the ends in just a second and why it doesn't really matter what platform they use. It's the ends that are important. All right. So let's think about what this would look like practically. And again, I'm using an example from my class. The class color is pink. So in ECE practicum classes, each practicum class is a color. Ours is actually purple. So everything looks like purple threw up all over my class. So if you're wondering, oh my goodness, she's got a love affair with purple, that's why. It's to remind them. So in here, I've got the assignment, but I tell them this is the skills that I'm wanting you to show me that you know. This is the only element that I want you to include. And I think this assignment is they need to create some sort of piece of information that another teacher could use to describe language development in infants or toddlers. And I tell them you can use any type of expression that you want. One of the big things when you start going down this, it's very disconcerting for students because it's an extra cognitive load to ask them perhaps to go and find those interactive tools. So I always have an option. If you just want to type it out on a Word document, that's fine too. I am looking for you to demonstrate that you understand and are proficient in these skills. If you feel you can represent that by typing it out, type it out. That's fine. But I provide them, here are some examples of different creative tools that you can use to express yourself if you want. I will say 80% of students will do a PowerPoint, which is absolutely fine. Some get into it and create brochures. Some take pictures and just submit the pictures. But this is just for this assignment, a couple different examples of what they'll do. So some have a very fun PowerPoint. Some create just a fun graphic to share. And then some, because trying to digitally upload something or print something is hard, they can even take a picture. And I thought I'd put it in here as an example, but I have students that do a poster board and they go to Walmart, get the poster board, have their crayons, have their markers and create it. And then they take a picture and upload the picture. And that's absolutely fine too. The important thing is I need to see these skills demonstrated. So by allowing them a creative way or a non-creative way, but a way that matches their own preference to display the knowledge, then it gives them the opportunity to truly demonstrate proficiency in those skills. When you do it this way, a rubric is super important, and we're going to talk about that in just a second when we look at the means, separating the means to the ends. So if I were to give this prompt to you as a student, if it says, write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works, I want you to think for a second, and if you feel like it, put in the chat, what would this measure? If this was my assignment, write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works, what exactly am I measuring? What exactly am I assessing? Unmute or put it in the chat. We'll give you a very long and painful minute to think about it. If I'm an instructor and I tell students, write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works, what exactly am I assessing? It could be a bit vague. So what am I assessing then? If it's
They're writing.
their writing, yeah, that's definitely one thing. So if I'm going to write a paragraph about the circulatory system works, Robert put the point seems a bit vague. So because of this, because of the lack of clarity in the prompt, I've assessed their ability to guess what I'm thinking, really, to extrapolate that. Now, if I have a rubric, that's helpful. But by putting write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works, my thought is I'm going to get the knowledge I'm going to get from them if they know how the circulatory system works. However, what I'm more likely to get is their ability to synthesize that information into written format, their proficiency with the English language, their ability to formulate a coherent paragraph, their ability to understand what a paragraph is, their ability to, if I'm having it in the classroom, to write that quickly and put that into written word. So you see how, because I put it very specifically, write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works, understanding and knowing that a student can demonstrate the knowledge of how the circulatory system works is a secondary thing that I'm assessing. I'm assessing first their ability to put that information into writing. So when I say separate the means from the ends, think about what is it that I want to see that students know. So if I'm an instructor in this prompt, I simply want to know that a student understands how the circulatory system works. More than likely, it doesn't matter how they choose to represent that information. They can create a jello mold representing how the circulatory system works. They can create a manufactured piece of gears and metal and wood, whatever it might be, if that demonstrates how the circulatory system works. They can write an elegant paragraph. They can find some interactive material. They can do it with yarn and clay, whatever it might be. Me as the instructor, I simply need to see that you know how the circulatory system works. And this is where those well-designed rubrics are going to come in handy. Because one of the questions I always get when I present on this concept is, how the heck am I supposed to grade it if one student has a video, one student has a paper, one student has a yarn activity, one student has a clay, one student has a jello mold? Because the rubric is focused on what are the skills they need to know. If I need to see in that rubric how blood flows from the heart to the left foot, I'm going to put that in my rubric. And students will see, okay, so whatever it is I create, I need to make sure that I have that in there. So when you're separating those means, how they display the knowledge from the ends to what it is I want to see you know, those rubrics on what the knowledge is I'm going to be assessing is going to be super important. You can't do something like this and allow flexible responses or flexible submissions without being very clear in your rubric. Not just for students, but more so for you, because then it doesn't matter how they submit it. I don't even have to go back and read my prompts anymore and to see, okay, do they meet all the prompts? Because if I said, this is what I need to see, and in their demonstration or whatever they submitted, I see that, then I can check off, yeah, I can see you know these skills that I've designed. Check, 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 move. My grading is so much quicker. My grading is so much more enjoyable because I'm not looking at the same exact representation of information. Sometimes I have a voice recording. Sometimes I have a video recording. Sometimes I have a snapshot of a poster board that they made. And it makes it so much more fun and enjoyable to be able to see that. And students enjoy it so much more because they've been allowed multiple ways to represent their knowledge in a way that's a best fit for them. Does that make sense, that concept of separating the means from the ends? Are there any questions about that? Because this is really the key element when we're looking at a UDL approach to assessments.
I have a question actually, Amanda.
Yep.
So I could see, I mean, in an English class, they're writing, but I could see places where they could do something a little bit different, where they're still showing what a thesis is in just a different way. But a lot of what I do is revision, and it feels, I would hate for a student to do a creative project and then say, okay, you need to revise this part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that?
So the big part is I be very specific about what's missing. So most often when that's the case, the whole project isn't missing the mark. It's just pieces that I don't see. So it's very clear in the comments and very clear in the rubric. This is a great start. You've got a great foundation, but I'm not able to see, like on my language development, I've got it up on my other thing. Recall basic milestones of language development. I'm not seeing that in your project. Can you represent that you know that knowledge so I can check you off for skill proficiency? A lot of the times they just submit a paper, quick write-up. Sometimes they choose to revise their project, whatever it is. But again, 99% of the time, what they've submitted is almost there. I'm just not seeing different elements. So if they show me they know that element, then I check it off. Still might be different for English depending on what the holistic concept is, but that's usually what happens in the class. Is they're just missing small little elements that they can fill in, and then I'm good to go. I think, Robert, one in having a lot of conversations with chemistry, because we talked through doing this a couple of semesters ago with some of my chemistry instructors. It was the specific elements that might be missing. So if they submit some sort of project, most of the time, to Lori's point, they're going to be missing something. And so the talk was, okay, what about at the end of the semester, there's an open lab day that they come in and say, all right, you haven't shown me you know how to do these points on the microscope. So you come back during the open lab day and you can demonstrate it. Whatever those concepts might be me missing. But really, as a discipline expert, it's you having to think through. And AI actually is fantastic at helping think of different ways to implement UDL in your classroom as well. But it's having to think through, okay, what is the skills I need them to see? What are the ways I can suggest they do that? And students come up with super creative ways to do that. I know we're running out of time, but one of the cool ideas that a student had come up with me as we were documenting development through adolescence. And so they paired it with Harry Potter and tied their knowledge of developmental through all the Harry Potter books and what were the developmental milestones they saw Harry Potter going through from book 1 to book 7. That was fantastic. How fun is that? And I'm a Harry Potter fan, so it made it even more fun. So it's just letting them have that creative expression. All right. Principles of engagement. Really, these are not new things that I haven't been talking about. When you're trying to engage your students and engage them with the content, being able to optimize that relevance. And so personalize the learning, letting them connect it to their own lives as much as possible. What are those real applications that they might have? Again, I know this isn't an OER workshop, but I can't help but I'm always advocating it for, because in OER you can change the content to be relevant. So if I'm talking about a town, I can change the town to talk about Reedley. If the content mentions a book, or I'm sorry, a street, I can change it to the streets in Reedley. I can change the names to names that they know. I can change the names of other instructors. So making it more relevant to their lives, putting the Central Valley, Reedley into all of that content to make it, oh, this applies to me, or issues that they're facing. Having to deal with the snow level is not something that they have to understand, but having to drive through fog is something they have to understand. So optimize that relevance in that content. Foster creativity and foster curiosity. It's finding the balance of not being too hard. This is where child development is so important, but it's the zone of proximal development. Is I want them to be curious and I want to stretch them and I want to have challenging tasks in a way that aren't overwhelming. And this is where it can be super important to implement those that not that bell curves and find tasks that are challenging in different ways to each student. Because if a student is overly challenged, we know what they're going to do is they're just going to shut down and say, I'm not even going to try. This is too hard. But if we're able to challenge them at a place that they are, then that fosters that curiosity. Yep.
Amanda, Rayon has a good question. These are
Oh,
great ideas, but my challenge would be how to apply these in an AMT learning environment.
yeah, that's a really good question. And um I don't know. And because here's the thing is I know you're tied to different certifications by FAA that you have to abide by. And this is where I'm going to say AI is such a cool thought partner in how to think through that. Because I don't know AMT. So I can suggest, okay, what if they were able to submit a video walkthrough, like they had to identify different parts of the turbine engine. And instead of you walking through and pointing to it, they create a video on their own or create a clay model. But that might be going against some FAA certification. So that would be my biggest suggestion, is to have a conversation with AI and say, here are the limitations. I want to create a way to assess my students and blah, 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 whatever it might be. But here is what I'm tied to that I must demonstrate. Those certifications are much more difficult to apply some of these concepts because you really are held to those specific ways to assess knowledge. What you can do is do that other piece of it where you're representing knowledge in a variety of way. So yes, you have these manuals that they have to learn from, but what are different videos that you can supplement, or what are different interactive ways that you can supplement your CTE? So you already have so much hands-on, but how can I represent the knowledge in new ways that might help to click with students? Probably be my best guess. Um, I know that was really a non-answer, so I'm sorry. So how do we do this in a practical way? I will always abuse the option to talk about backward design. And here we are again talking about the importance of backward design. We always want to start with those course objectives. What is it I want students to learn? What are the skills? What are the standards? What is it students will walk away from this module, from this course knowing? Because we have to start with that, because everything else that we do is meant to support students to get to that end result. And if we don't understand what that end result is, then everything we're doing is just because a textbook publisher did, or just because at the whims of whatever I felt like today. So we need to know, okay, what are the goals, outcomes that I need to get at the end? Separate those means from the ends. Take a look and see, all right, all of my assessments, does the modality they're submitting it really matter in this? What are some options that I can give? I need to see this skill. How can I offer these small little options to get there? And then applying those UDL principles throughout. So like Rayanne was saying, or put in there, maybe it's not something you can do multiple means in assessment. Maybe it can just be multiple means of knowledge consumption. So figure out how can I practically implement those concepts. Misconceptions about UDL. See, I know this was going to be hard to fit into 9 minutes, so I might speed up just a little bit. It's not just for struggling learners. This is applicable and great for all learners. UDL is a framework. It's a framework for us to work within. It's not just this is a set of specific things you have to do. It's a different way of thinking about these things. And it's not an easy out. It doesn't reduce the rigor, which is the argument that I get. It makes it so that your learning, your outcomes, your success rates are better representations of what students knows. You probably all know what the barriers are. You can think about them in your head right now and are probably listing them, so I don't need to go over this slide. Benefits all learners. This is the one that I really just want to rest on really quick, because this might seem overwhelming. Oh my goodness, how do I do this? So the big concept that I advocate largely for people is just think +1. If I have a content, how do I +1 this? How do I simply add one additional way to explain this? How do I add one additional way they can express this? So even if it's an assessment, if I know, okay, it has to be, there is only one way they can submit this, is there one additional way they can submit that? Can you give them an option? Does it have to be in writing, or can they create a video? Just have that +1 option. You can write this, or you can create a video. It's the best way to get started. If it feels overwhelming to think about doing these, think about just doing a +1 to engage and provide that information. I, I don't even know where to start with accessibility. So I'm just going to leave it at this because I don't want to rush through accessibility. But one of the things I do want to say about UDL and accessibility is they shouldn't be conflated in your mind. Implementing UDL is one way to get to accessibility. It's going to help all learners. It doesn't matter if the students need to have the accommodations. By implementing our the strategies of UDL, it's going to help all students, whether they think they need that support or not. One of the best examples that you'll hear in all of these presentations is the example of curb cuts. Now, curb cuts were put in initially to support students that are in, students, people that are in wheelchairs. But think about how often or how many other people curb cuts are helpful for. They're helpful for strollers, they're helpful for bikes, they're helpful for elderly that might not be able to step up so high. This is the same concept that UDL is even though it's beneficial significantly for students who might have alternative ways of thinking or alternative abilities, it's helpful for all students as well. Okay. Questions, thoughts, concerns? I really didn't think I'd make it to the end. So yay, we kind of made it to the end. Any thoughts? But what?
Yeah, I was going to say these are great tips, and one thing that I was really thinking when you were talking about uh, how to plan this the, the the maximization of learning for students, I was even thinking about applying the techniques even in sub level where when I create a lab for students, I need to think about how I can creatively uh, lay that out where uh, I have to keep in mind different learning styles of different students.
Yeah.
And then keeping that in mind, I can actually design the lab accordingly. So it's a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah, and it might even be finding a way to record, if you're lecturing or providing information, being able to record that and put it on Canvas so students can consume it at a later time as well. I remember when I started recording all of my face-to-face lectures, my students said it's so beneficial because I can pause you. And it took me a second to realize what they were saying, but I know it's surprising. I talk really fast and I try and slow myself down when I'm speaking in class, but I'm not successful a lot of times. And so students said, I can put you at a slower speed and listen to you at a speed that's easier for me, especially for students that are second language learners. And so I thought, well, that's brilliant. And so that's why I always advocate for recording lectures and putting it on.
There is a comment, a chat. If this is great, if I put together some content, how can I get feedback to make sure I'm on the right track?
Oh, I'd love to help out, Robert. You can here, let me just, is that a subtle way to say, can you put your contact information?
Maybe.
It's my bread and butter. I can't remember where you said you were from, but your instructional designers at your home campus are also all well versed in UDL. It's kind of what we do. So I'm helpful to provide support. But Sue at Fresno City, Tracy at Clovis, and Aaron at Madera are also incredibly great. So Sue at Fresno City is wonderful. But I'm also more than happy to sit down to Robert with you.
Amanda, I have a question.
Hmm.
I wanted to know, I teach accounting, which is like 4 lecture and 1 hour lab. It's kind of a long class, whether it's face to face or online.
Hmm.
And so I think this is a great concept, but I'm just trying to figure out grasping how I could utilize it in my courses. And you, is this something that you just do for the final project, or is this something you do throughout? And the reason why I'm asking that, because I do weekly activities, but I was wondering maybe, like you said, +1, only try it on one thing.
Yeah.
Maybe just try it on the final exam versus taking the final
Hmm.
here. Instead, you can do a project where you create a video or a TikTok video for these key concepts, or create I don't know, just some other type of activity or a board
Hmm.
or a PowerPoint of all the stuff that you were supposed to learn for the course.
Hmm.
Is that like
Oh,
too
fantastic idea. No,
overwhelming, or just should this
no,
be just
and I
get
think
them in the
that's
habit of it
Yep,
the
get them in the
beginning.
habit and get you in the habit too, because it's hard as an instructor as well to figure out when you've got all these different submissions, what that would look like. And that's one of the big things that I suggest is a good rubric, because for a final exam, there's going to be a lot of different concepts you're going to expect to see. So I would, as the instructor, sit down and figure out, okay, what is it I expect them to be able to demonstrate to me? Because if they're going to do, a game board or a TikTok video or a PowerPoint, you're going to have to see, okay, what are the concepts I need to see in that? And again, this is a great use of AI as well, because you can have that conversations and say, what am I missing? What other concepts might I missing? And you can even say, this is the traditional final exam that I usually have. I want to put this into more a UDL framework and offer students options. What would my rubric look like to make sure I assess appropriately? It's fantastic with those types of things. But I think that 1+1 is the way to go. That would be a really cool way to start.
Anyone else have a question or comment? Great. Well, this has been really good, Amanda, and I definitely have figured out what I'm going to do for a project now. It's something I've been wanting to do, and now I kind of realize how I can do it exactly. So I got a lot from this. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate the opportunity.